Imagine building a life from nothing, raising children alone, crying yourself to sleep for years, wondering what you did wrong. And then one day, he shows up at your door. The same man who walked out without a word. Except this time, he's not leaving, he's begging. What she said next nobody expected. Not her children, not her pastor, not even her own mother. Stay with me, because this story doesn't go where you think it does. Before we go any further, if you're watching this right now, I need you to stop whatever you're doing. Put the phone down. Close the other tabs. Because what you're about to hear is the kind of story that will stay with you long after this video ends. It's the kind of story that makes you call your mother, that makes you hug your kids a little tighter, that makes you sit quietly in a room and ask yourself, what would I have done? This is not a story about hate. It is not a story about revenge. It is a story about a woman named Diane, a real woman with real scars and a real life that was shattered and then rebuilt piece by piece with her bare hands. And it is a story about a man named David, a man who had everything: a wife who loved him, children who adored him, a home full of warmth, and chose to walk away from all of it, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And it is a story about what happens when the consequences of your choices finally catch up with you. When the door you slammed shut is the only door left in the world you have to knock on. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, to understand what happened on that porch on that cold October morning, you have to go back, way back. Back to a small town in Georgia in the early 1990s, where a young woman named Diane was just beginning to understand what it meant to love someone with everything you had. Diane grew up in a tight-knit family in Macon, Georgia. She was the second of 4 children, raised by a mother who worked as a school cafeteria cook, and a father who drove long-haul trucks across the Southeast. They didn't have much, but what they had, they shared. Diane learned early that love was not a feeling, it was a decision. It was showing up, it was staying. It was doing the hard thing when the easy thing was to walk away. She carried that lesson with her like a compass. And for most of her life, it pointed her in the right direction. She was the kind of girl who remembered everyone's birthday, who stayed after church to help fold the chairs, who would give you her last $20 and tell you not to worry about paying it back. Everyone who knew Diane back then will tell you the same thing. She was the kind of person who made the world feel a little safer just by being in it. She met David in the spring of 1993. She was 23 years old, working as a receptionist at a medical clinic in downtown Macon, saving money to go back to school for her nursing degree. David was 26, tall, broad-shouldered, with a laugh that could fill a room. He worked in construction management and had a way of talking about the future that made you believe every word of it. He talked about the house they'd build one day, the vacations they'd take, the life they'd create together. And Diane, who had spent her whole life being the steady one, the responsible one, the one who held everything together, found herself swept up in his vision. For the first time in her life, someone was painting a picture of the future and putting her right in the center of it. They dated for 2 years. He proposed on a Sunday afternoon in her mother's backyard, with a ring he'd saved up for over 8 months. Diane said yes before he even finished the sentence. They were married in June of 1995, in a small Baptist church with 200 people packed into the pews. Her mother cried through the entire ceremony. Her father shook David's hand and told him, "You take care of my daughter." David looked him in the eye and said, "Yes, sir. Always." The first few years of their marriage were, by most accounts, genuinely happy. They rented a small house on the east side of Macon. Diane continued working at the clinic. David picked up contracts with a local construction firm and was making decent money. In 1997, their first child was born, a boy they named Jordan. 2 years later, a girl, Kayla. And in 2001, their youngest, another girl named Simone. 3 children in 4 years. The house was loud and full and chaotic in the best possible way. Diane had put her nursing school plans on hold. There simply wasn't time, wasn't money, wasn't space in the schedule. But she told herself it was temporary. She told herself that once the kids were a little older, once David's business was more stable, once things settled down, she'd go back. She'd get her degree. She'd build the career she'd always wanted. She was patient. She was willing to wait. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the life she was waiting for was already beginning to slip away. Because here is the thing about David that nobody fully understood until it was too late. David was a man who was deeply, profoundly uncomfortable with stillness. He needed movement. He needed novelty. He needed the feeling of possibility, The feeling that something better, something bigger, something more exciting was just around the corner. And marriage, real marriage, with its routines and its responsibilities and its quiet Tuesday nights, did not give him that feeling. It gave him something else entirely. It gave him weight. And David had never been good at carrying weight. People who knew him back then describe a man who was always chasing the next thing. A new business idea, a new investment, a new group of friends. He was the kind of man who was electric in a crowd, but restless at home. The kind of man who could charm a room full of strangers, but couldn't sit through a school play without checking his phone. Diane noticed. She noticed the way he'd come home later and later. The way his eyes would glaze over during dinner. The way he'd answer her questions with one-word responses, and then disappear into the garage for hours. She noticed, and she did what she had been taught to do. She tried harder. She cooked his favorite meals. She planned date nights. She prayed. She talked to her pastor. She read books about marriage. She did everything right, and none of it was enough. By 2004, the cracks in their marriage had become something closer to fault lines. David had left his construction job to start his own business. A contracting company that he promised would change their lives. Diane supported him. She picked up extra shifts at the clinic. She managed the household budget down to the last dollar. She kept the children fed and clothed and loved while David chased his dream. But the business struggled. Contracts fell through. Money got tight. And instead of pulling closer together under the pressure, David pulled away. He started spending nights away from home, claiming he was meeting with clients, working late, handling problems with the business. Diane wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. Because the alternative, the thing she felt in her gut but refused to name, was too painful to look at directly. She had 3 children. She had a mortgage. She had a life built around this man. And so she looked away. She kept going. She kept holding it together. She kept telling Jordan and Kayla and little Simone that Daddy was just busy, that everything was fine, that they were going to be okay. And then came the Tuesday in March of 2005 that Diane has described, in the years since, as the night her life split in two. She was in the bedroom folding laundry. The kids were asleep. The house was quiet. She heard the front door open, and then close. She assumed David was stepping outside for some air. She finished folding the laundry. She brushed her teeth. She got into bed. She waited. An hour passed, then 2. She called his cell phone. It rang and rang. She told herself he'd gone to get gas. She told herself there was a reasonable explanation. She fell asleep somewhere around 2 in the morning, still in her clothes, still holding her phone. When she woke up at 6 to get the kids ready for school, David's side of the bed was empty. His truck was gone from the driveway, and on the kitchen counter, nothing. No note, no message, no explanation. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the sound of her youngest daughter calling out from her bedroom, "Mommy, where's Daddy?" Diane said that the next 72 hours were the longest of her life. She called David's phone dozens of times. She called his mother, his brother, his friends from work. She drove past the job sites she knew about. She filed a missing persons report with the Macon Police Department. Not because she truly believed something had happened to him, but because she didn't know what else to do. And then, on the 3rd day, she got a text message. Not a call, a text. It said, "I'm okay, I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore. Please don't look for me." That was it. 11 words. After 12 years together. After 3 children. After everything she had given and sacrificed and held together. 11 words on a screen. Diane sat down on the kitchen floor and did not get up for a very long time. She has said that in that moment she felt something she had never felt before and has never felt since. A complete and total emptiness. Like someone had reached inside her chest and removed something essential. Something she didn't even have a name for. She sat on that kitchen floor and she cried until she had nothing left. And then, because Jordan and Kayla and Simone needed breakfast, she got up, she washed her face, she made the eggs, she drove them to school, and she began the long, brutal, unglamorous work of surviving. What followed was not a montage. It was not a triumphant comeback set to an inspirational soundtrack. It was years, actual years, of grinding, exhausting, relentless survival. Diane's mother, Miss Ruth, moved into the house within a week of David's disappearance. She slept on the pull-out couch in the living room and helped with the children while Diane worked. Diane picked up a second job, evenings at a grocery store, stocking shelves after the kids were in bed. She applied for food assistance. She negotiated with the mortgage company. She sold her car and bought a cheaper one. She did what she had to do every single day, without complaint, without drama, without the luxury of falling apart. Because falling apart was not an option. Not when Jordan was asking why his dad hadn't called. Not when Kayla started wetting the bed again at age 7 because she was so anxious. Not when little Simone, who was only 4 when David left, started calling every tall man she saw daddy in the grocery store. Diane held it together. She held it together so completely, so consistently, that people around her sometimes forgot she was holding anything at all. But at night, after the kids were asleep and Miss Ruth had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Diane allowed herself to feel it. She has talked about those nights in the years since, and what she describes is not anger, not bitterness. What she describes is grief. Pure, uncomplicated grief, the kind you feel when someone you love dies. Except David hadn't died. He had chosen to leave, and in some ways, that was harder. Because there was no closure, no funeral, no moment where the community gathered around her and said, "We're so sorry for your loss." There was just absence, just the empty chair at the dinner table, just the side of the bed that stayed cold, just the questions from her children that she didn't know how to answer. She prayed a lot during those years. She leaned on her faith in a way she never had before. She found a therapist, a Black woman named Dr. Patricia Moore, who had an office above a dry cleaning shop on Riverside Drive, and she went every other week for 3 years. She did the work, the hard, invisible, internal work of putting herself back together. And slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, things began to change. By 2007, Diane had enrolled in a nursing program at a community college in Macon. She took classes 2 nights a week and on Saturday mornings. Miss Ruth watched the kids. Jordan, who was 10 by then, started helping with dinner on the nights Diane had class. He'd make sandwiches and pour juice and sit with his sisters at the kitchen table doing homework. This 10-year-old boy who had already learned more about responsibility than most grown men ever would. Diane graduated from the nursing program in 2009. She got a job at a hospital in Macon, real hours, real pay, real benefits. For the first time since David left, she felt something shift inside her. Not happiness exactly. Not yet, but something adjacent to it. Something that felt like the beginning of solid ground. By 2011, she had paid off the back mortgage payments that had accumulated in the years after David left. By 2013, she had refinanced the house in her name alone. By 2015, 20 years after she had walked down the aisle in that Baptist church in a dress her mother had helped her pick out, Diane owned her home outright. No cosigner, no partner. Just her name on the deed. Just her. And she stood in her kitchen the day she got the paperwork and she cried. But this time, it was a different kind of crying entirely. Jordan graduated high school in 2015 with a 3.8 GPA and a full academic scholarship to Georgia State University. Kayla followed in 2017, heading to nursing school, following in her mother's footsteps, she said, because she wanted to be exactly like her. Simone, the youngest, the one who'd been only 4 years old when her father walked out the door, was by 2019 a junior in high school with a 4.0 GPA, a spot on the debate team, and a college savings account that Diane had been building for her since 2010. Diane had done it. She had taken the wreckage of what David left behind and built something extraordinary from it. Not because she was superhuman, not because she didn't feel the pain, but because she refused, absolutely refused, to let his choice define the rest of her story. She had written a new story, and it was better than anything David had ever promised her on that Sunday afternoon in her mother's backyard. Now, where was David during all of this? That is the question that everyone who knew Diane eventually asked. And the answer, when it finally came to light, was both unsurprising and deeply sad. David had moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, shortly after leaving Macon. He had, in fact, been involved with another woman, a woman named Cheryl, whom he had met through a mutual friend at a work event in 2003. He moved in with Cheryl within weeks of leaving Diane. He told people in Charlotte that he was divorced. He told people he and his ex-wife had grown apart. He did not mention the 3 children he had left behind. He did not mention the mortgage Diane was struggling to pay. He did not mention the 4-year-old girl who was calling strangers daddy in the grocery store. He simply started over, as if the previous 12 years had been a rough draft he could crumple up and throw away. He and Cheryl had a child together in 2007, a boy. And for a while it seemed like David had found what he was looking for. A new life, a clean slate, a fresh start. But the thing about a man who runs from his problems is that his problems have legs too. And they always catch up eventually. By 2010, David and Cheryl's relationship had deteriorated badly. The same patterns that had destroyed his marriage to Diane were reasserting themselves. The restlessness, the absence, the inability to be present for the people who needed him. Cheryl threw him out in 2011. He moved into an apartment. He drifted through a series of jobs and relationships over the next several years, never quite landing anywhere stable. He made sporadic attempts to contact Jordan and Kayla and Simone over the years, a birthday card here, a text message there, but the children, guided by their own pain and by the quiet dignity of their mother, kept their distance. Jordan, in particular, had made his feelings clear in a letter he wrote to his father at age 16, a letter that David reportedly read and wept over but never responded to, because responding would have required accountability. And accountability was the one thing David had never been able to offer the people he loved. By 2018, David's health had begun to decline. He had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in 2015, which he managed poorly. In 2018, he suffered a minor stroke that left him with weakness on his left side and difficulty with his speech for several months. He was 51 years old. He was living alone in a one-bedroom apartment in a part of Charlotte that had seen better days. He had no savings. He had no support system. The friends he'd made in Charlotte had drifted away as his circumstances worsened. Cheryl had moved on and remarried. His son from that relationship, now 11 years old, barely knew him. And somewhere in the long, quiet nights of that apartment, David began to reckon with what he had done. Not in the way people reckon with things in movies. Not in a dramatic, tearful confession to a priest or a therapist. But in the slow, grinding, inescapable way that reality eventually forces itself on a person who has spent years running from it. He began to understand, with a clarity that came too late and cost too much, that every door he had ever walked out of had been a door he could never fully walk back through. And there was one door, one specific door, in a house in Macon, Georgia, that he could not stop thinking about. He called Jordan first. Jordan was 21 by then, in his second year at Georgia State. The call lasted 4 minutes. Jordan was polite, he was measured. He told his father that he was glad he was alive, that he hoped he would get the help he needed, and that he was not in a position to have a relationship with him right now. Then he hung up. He called Kayla. Kayla did not answer. He left a voicemail. She did not call back. He sent Simone a message on social media. She read it and did not respond. And then, after exhausting every other option, after burning every other bridge, after arriving at the end of every road he had taken away from the life he had abandoned, David got in his car on a Saturday morning in October of 2019 and drove 14 hours south on I-85 to Macon, Georgia. He had not called ahead. He had not warned anyone. He simply drove. And when he pulled up in front of the house, the same house he had walked out of 14 years earlier, except now it had a new coat of paint and flower boxes in the windows and a small vegetable garden along the side fence that Diane had planted the previous spring. He sat in his car for 45 minutes before he could make himself get out. Diane was in the kitchen, making breakfast when the doorbell rang. Her youngest, Simone, was home from school for the weekend. She was a freshman at Spelman College by then, home for a long weekend. Diane wiped her hands on a dish towel and went to the door. She has described the moment she opened it in a way that is almost impossible to fully convey. She said that her first thought was that she didn't recognize him. The man standing on her porch was thinner than she remembered. His hair had gone gray at the temples. His shoulders, those broad, confident shoulders that had once made her feel safe, were curved inward like something structural inside him had given way. He was wearing a jacket that was slightly too big for him. He was holding his car keys in both hands, turning them over and over, the way a person does when they don't know what to do with their hands. And then he looked up, and she knew. She knew immediately. She stood in the doorway of the home she had built without him, in the life she had constructed from the ruins he had left behind, and she looked at the man who had once been her husband. And she felt, she has said this and it is important, she felt nothing like what she expected to feel. She had spent years imagining this moment, years rehearsing what she would say, years cycling through anger and grief and contempt and, eventually, something quieter and harder to name. But standing there in the actual moment, looking at the actual man, what she felt was not rage. It was not satisfaction. It was not the rush of vindication she might have expected. What she felt, she has said, was something closer to sorrow. Not for herself, for him. For the man who had thrown away everything that mattered, and was now standing on her porch with nothing left. He spoke first. His voice was different, quieter, rougher around the edges. He said her name. Just her name, Diane. And then he said, "I know I have no right to be here. I know that. But I didn't have anywhere else to go." He told her about the stroke, about the diabetes, about the apartment in Charlotte and the job he'd lost and the money that had run out. He told her about Cheryl, and about his son in Charlotte who didn't know him, and about the years of drifting that had brought him to this moment. He talked for a long time. Diane stood in the doorway and she listened. She did not invite him in. She did not interrupt him. She simply listened, the way she had always listened, fully, carefully, with her whole attention. And when he was finished, when he had said everything he had come to say, he did something that Simone, who had come to stand quietly in the hallway behind her mother, would later describe as the most heartbreaking thing she had ever witnessed. David got down on his knees, on Diane's front porch. This man who had once been so proud, so certain of himself, so convinced that the world would always bend to accommodate him. He got down on his knees on the painted wood of her porch, and he wept. He said, "I know I don't deserve anything from you, I know that. But I'm asking anyway, please." The silence that followed lasted a long time, long enough for a car to pass on the street outside, long enough for a bird to call from the oak tree in the front yard, long enough for Simone, standing in the hallway, to press her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. And then Diane spoke. She spoke quietly. She spoke without anger, without cruelty, without the satisfaction of someone who has been waiting years to deliver a verdict. She spoke the way a person speaks when they have done the work, the real, internal, unglamorous work, of healing. She said, "David, I forgave you a long time ago, not for you, for me, and for our children, because I could not carry that weight and also carry everything else I had to carry. So I put it down, I let it go, and I moved on." She paused. And then she said, "But forgiveness is not the same as an open door. I built this life without you. My children built themselves without you. Jordan is in graduate school. Kayla is a nurse. Simone is at Spelman on a full scholarship. They did that, I did that, we did that without you. And we are not your rescue plan." She reached behind her and picked up a piece of paper from the small table near the door. A piece of paper she had written on while he was talking, while he was on his knees while Simone was watching from the hallway. On it were the names and addresses of 3 shelters in Macon, the number for the county social services office, and the name of a church on Forsyth Street that offered free medical assistance and counseling. She held it out to him. He looked at it for a long moment, then he took it, and she said, "I hope you find your way, David. I genuinely do. But that way is not through my door." And then she stepped back and she closed the door, not with a slam, not with anger, gently, firmly, with the quiet, absolute finality of a woman who knows exactly who she is and exactly what she owes the world, and what she does not. Simone has said that after the door closed, her mother stood in the hallway for a moment with her hand still on the doorknob. And then she turned around, and she looked at her daughter, and she said, "Go finish your breakfast, baby. The eggs are getting cold." That was it. No dramatic speech, no tears, no moment of visible triumph or collapse. Just a mother, turning back toward her kitchen, toward her life, toward the ordinary and extraordinary morning that was still unfolding inside the walls of the home she had built. Simone has said that it was the most powerful thing she has ever seen another human being do. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. Because it was the culmination of 14 years of quiet, daily, relentless choosing. Choosing herself, choosing her children, choosing her future over her grief. And it happened in a hallway, in a house in Macon, Georgia, on a Saturday morning in October, with eggs getting cold on the stove. David drove back to Charlotte that afternoon. He did, eventually, reach out to the social services office whose number Diane had given him. He received some assistance with his medical bills and was connected with a housing program. He has made no further attempts to contact Diane or their children, as far as anyone knows. Whether he found his way, truly found it, is something only he can answer. But that is his story to write now. Diane's story, the one that matters here, was already written. It was written in the nursing degree she earned while raising 3 children alone. It was written in the mortgage she paid off with her own hands. It was written in Jordan's graduate school acceptance letter, in Kayla's nursing badge, in Simone's scholarship to Spelman. It was written in every morning she got up when she didn't want to, in every night she held it together when falling apart would have been so much easier. And it was written, finally, in the quiet, dignified, devastating grace with which she closed that door. Here is what Diane's story asks of all of us. It asks us to consider what we do with the weight of being left. It asks us to think about the difference between forgiveness and access, because they are not the same thing, and our culture often confuses them. It asks us to look at the women in our lives, our mothers, our sisters, our friends, who are quietly carrying impossible loads and calling it ordinary. It asks us to recognize that survival is not a small thing, that rebuilding is not a small thing, that choosing every single day to keep going, that is not a small thing. It is, in fact, one of the most extraordinary things a human being can do. And it asks us finally to sit with a question, not a comfortable question, Not an easy one, but an important one. If the person who hurt you most, the one who left you with nothing, who walked away without looking back, showed up at your door one day, broken and begging, what would you say? What would you do? Would you have the strength to forgive without surrendering? Would you have the clarity to close the door without closing your heart? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one. And I promise you, the conversation that happens in the comments section of this video is going to be one of the most powerful things you've ever been a part of. Because this story touches something real, something that a lot of people are carrying and not talking about. And this is a space where we talk about it. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, if it made you think of someone you know, if it made you want to call somebody, share it. Share it with your sister. Share it with your friend who is going through something hard right now. Share it with anyone who needs to be reminded that the story is not over just because someone walked out of it. And if you are new here, welcome. This is what we do here. We bring you stories like this one. Real stories. Human stories. Stories about the things that break us and the things that put us back together.